Picture this. You're standing on a dusty battlefield in ancient Gaul. 60,000 screaming warriors are charging toward your position. You have 8 legions, about 40,000 men. The enemy outnumbers you. They know the terrain. They're fighting for their homeland. Most commanders would retreat. Maybe negotiate. Perhaps pray to the gods. But you're not most commanders. You're a Roman general. And retreat isn't in your vocabulary. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the stories of Rome's greatest military minds. The generals who didn't just win battles, they changed the course of human history. These weren't just soldiers. They were strategists, politicians, and sometimes absolute madmen who bent entire civilizations to Rome's will. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Roman military doctrine is still studied in war colleges today, 2,000 years later. You'll see how a city that started as a small settlement on 7 hills came to dominate the known world. And you'll meet the men who made it happen. If you enjoy deep dives into military history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're building a community of history enthusiasts here, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. Let's get into it. We're starting with a general most people have never heard of, but who accomplished something extraordinary. He defeated one of history's greatest military geniuses in his own backyard. Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus. Even his name sounds powerful, doesn't it? The year is 218 BC. Rome is facing an existential crisis. Hannibal Barca, yes, the Hannibal, the one with the elephants, has just crossed the Alps with his army and is tearing through Italy like a tornado through a trailer park. For 16 years, Hannibal would defeat every Roman army sent against him. At Cannae, he surrounded and destroyed a Roman force of 80,000 men, one of the worst military disasters in history. Rome was on the ropes. Enter Scipio. He was only 25 years old when he took command of Roman forces in Spain. Here's what made Scipio different. He actually studied his enemy. Revolutionary concept, right? While other Roman generals kept using the same tactics and getting destroyed, Scipio watched how Hannibal fought. He analyzed. He adapted. Think of it like this. If traditional Roman commanders were playing checkers, Scipio learned to play chess. He took Spain from Carthaginian control using speed, deception, and, this is important, he treated conquered peoples with respect. Radical idea for the time. He'd capture Spanish nobles and send them home with gifts. He won hearts and minds while his enemies were still trying to conquer through fear alone. But here's where Scipio's genius really shines. Everyone expected him to march through Spain into Gaul and try to cut off Hannibal's supply lines. Standard playbook stuff. Scipio did something crazy. He invaded Africa. He took the fight straight to Carthage's doorstep. Imagine you're in a boxing match and you've been on the defensive for 15 rounds. Your opponent is bigger, stronger, and he's been landing punches all night. Everyone expects you to keep blocking, keep retreating. Instead, you drop your guard and charge straight at him. That's what Scipio did. Carthage panicked. They recalled Hannibal from Italy, the first time he'd left in 16 years. The two titans finally faced each other at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. Hannibal brought elephants. Scipio had studied elephant tactics in Spain. He created lanes in his formation. The elephants charged right through without breaking his lines. Then Scipio's cavalry, led by a Numidian king he befriended earlier, hit Hannibal's flanks. Hannibal, the undefeated genius, lost. The Second Punic War was over. Rome's survival was secured. Scipio earned the name Africanus, the conqueror of Africa. He was 33 years old. What can we learn from Scipio? Innovation beats tradition when tradition keeps losing. Study your opponent. Adapt. And sometimes, the best defense is a completely unexpected offense. Scipio proved that Rome could produce generals as brilliant as any in the world. But he was just the beginning. Let's jump forward about a century. Rome is now a superpower, but its military system is badly outdated. That's where our next general comes in. A man who didn't just win battles, he fundamentally transformed how Rome made war. Gaius Marius. 7 times consul. The uncle of Julius Caesar. And the architect of the professional Roman army. Here's the situation. Roman legions were traditionally made up of property-owning citizens. You had to own land to serve. Makes sense, right? You're defending your property. But there's a problem. Rome's expanding like crazy. They need more soldiers than property owners can provide. Plus, these citizen soldiers want to go home and farm after a campaign. They're not professional warriors. It's like trying to build a global corporation using only part-time employees. Eventually, you need full-timers. Marius opened military service to landless citizens, the proletariat, Rome's poorest class. Revolutionary. Scandalous. Brilliant. He professionalized the army. standardized equipment, created the cohort system that would dominate European warfare for centuries. He made the eagle standard the sacred symbol of each legion. Soldiers would die before losing their eagle. Think of Marius as the Steve Jobs of Roman military reform. He didn't invent soldiers, but he redesigned the entire system into something sleeker, more efficient, and way more deadly. But Marius wasn't just an administrator. The man could fight. In 105 BC, Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutons, were pouring into Roman territory. They'd already destroyed several Roman armies. These weren't disciplined soldiers. They were massive tribal migrations of warriors, women, children, wagons. Hundreds of thousands of people. Rome was terrified. They elected Marius consul and gave him command. At Aquae Sextiae in 102 BC, Marius faced the Teutons. His legions held the center while a detached force circled through the hills. When the Germans were fully engaged, Marius's hidden troops attacked from behind. Slaughter. Complete victory. Ancient sources claim 100,000 Germans died. The next year, at Vercelli, he defeated the Cimbri using similar tactics. The Germanic threat was crushed. But here's where things get complicated. Marius's reforms had an unintended consequence. Soldiers now owed loyalty to their general, not Rome. He paid them. He settled them on land after retirement. They were his legions. This would eventually lead to the civil wars that destroyed the Republic. Because when your soldiers are loyal to you personally, what's to stop you from marching on Rome itself? Remember that. It becomes very important with our next general. Marius transformed Rome from a regional power into a military machine capable of global conquest. Every legion that marched for the next 500 years used his system. Every Roman general that followed built on his foundation. But if Marius built the machine, our next general used it to conquer the world. Okay, you knew we were getting here. You can't talk about Roman generals without discussing Gaius Julius Caesar. But here's the thing, everyone knows Caesar crossed the Rubicon, became dictator, got stabbed on the Ides of March. That's the political Caesar. Today we're focusing on Caesar the general. Because before he was Rome's dictator, he was one of history's greatest military commanders. In 58 BC, Caesar became governor of Gaul. He was 42 years old, deep in debt, and his political career was stalling. Gaul, modern France and Belgium, was seen as a backwater assignment. Caesar saw opportunity. Over the next 9 years he would conquer all of Gaul, invade Britain twice, cross the Rhine into Germania, and fight battles that would become legendary. He'd face down Germanic warlords, crush the largest coalition of Celtic tribes ever assembled, and build a fortune that made him untouchable back in Rome. Oh, and he'd write about all of it in third person, ensuring his propaganda game was as strong as his military game. What made Caesar special? Speed, audacity, and an almost supernatural ability to inspire loyalty in his men. His legions could march faster than anyone thought possible. He'd appear where enemies thought he couldn't be, move faster than scouts could report. It's like he had GPS while everyone else was using paper maps. Let's talk about the Battle of Alesia in 52 BC. This is where Caesar's genius really shines. The Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, finally, a Gallic leader who understood Roman tactics, retreated into the hilltop fortress of Alesia with 80,000 warriors. Smart move. Make Caesar come to you. Caesar surrounded the fortress with a siege wall. 11 miles of fortifications, towers, and traps. But then Caesar gets intelligence. A relief army of 250,000 Gauls is coming to break the siege. So what does Caesar do? He builds another wall facing outward. He literally besieges a fortress while preparing to defend against an army 5 times his size. Picture this. Caesar's 60,000 legionaries are sandwiched between Vercingetorix's 80,000 warriors inside Alesia and 250,000 Gauls outside. He's outnumbered 6 to 1, surrounded on both sides. Any sane commander would retreat. Caesar attacks. When the relief army arrives, they assault Caesar's outer wall while Vercingetorix attacks from inside. The Romans are fighting on 2 fronts simultaneously. The battle rages all day. At the critical moment, when his lines are about to break, Caesar personally leads his cavalry reserve into the fight. His presence rallies his men. The Gauls break. The relief army scatters. Vercingetorix surrenders. Game over. Gaul is conquered. Here's something that sets Caesar apart. He knew his soldiers. Not just his officers, his common legionaries. He called them by name, share their hardships, fight alongside them. There's a story from the Battle of Munda in Spain. Caesar's line was wavering, about to break. He grabbed a shield, pushed to the front, and screamed at his men, "Are you going to let me be handed over to these boys?" It worked. His soldiers rallied. They won. That's leadership. That's why Caesar's veterans would follow him anywhere, even across the Rubicon into civil war. And Caesar documented everything in Commentarii de Bello Gallico, the Gallic Wars. It's propaganda, sure, written to boost his political career. But it's also a military masterpiece still studied today. Writing about yourself in third person is weird, I'll admit. Caesar did this. Caesar did that. But it worked. He controlled his own narrative. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a carefully curated Instagram feed, except instead of brunch photos, it's genocide and conquest. Different times. Let's be real for a second. Caesar's conquest of Gaul killed roughly 1 million people and enslaved another million. Entire tribes were wiped out. It was brutal even by ancient standards. We can admire Caesar's military genius while acknowledging the human cost. These were real people with families, cultures, and lives that were destroyed to fuel Roman expansion and Caesar's ambition. History is complicated. Great generals are often terrible humans. Caesar proved that with the right combination of talent, ambition, and opportunity, one man could reshape the world. His campaigns in Gaul funded his political career, trained his legions, and gave him the power base to eventually seize control of Rome itself. Every conqueror who came after, Napoleon, Wellington, Patton, studied Caesar's campaigns. His strategies are timeless. But as revolutionary as Caesar was, there's one more general we need to discuss. A man who inherited Caesar's empire and used those legions to create something unprecedented. Our final general is probably the one you've heard of least. But in many ways he was the most important. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Best friend of Augustus Caesar. The general who won the civil war that ended the Roman Republic. The admiral who mastered naval warfare. The man who, more than anyone else, built the Roman Empire. Agrippa and Octavian, later Augustus, grew up together. When Caesar was assassinated and Octavian inherited his fortune and name, Agrippa became his military right hand. Here's the thing about Agrippa. He never sought glory for himself. He could have been emperor. His military record was better than Augustus's. But he was content to be the power behind the throne. Think of him as the ultimate wingman. Augustus got the credit, Agrippa won the battles. Agrippa's greatest achievement was defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Naval warfare was new to Rome. They were land power specialists. But Agrippa studied, innovated, and trained. He created new ship designs, developed new tactics, built harbors and trained sailors. At Actium, Agrippa commanded the fleet while Octavian watched from shore. Agrippa outmaneuvered Antony's larger fleet, cut off their escape, and won decisively. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt and eventually committed suicide. The civil war was over. The Republic was dead. The empire could begin. But Agrippa wasn't just a warrior. After the wars he became Rome's greatest builder. The Pantheon? Agrippa built the original. The aqueducts that brought water to Rome? Agrippa. Public baths? Agrippa. Infrastructure projects across the empire? Agrippa. He understood something crucial. Empires aren't just won with swords. They're maintained with roads, water systems, and public works. Conquest is dramatic, but administration is what makes it last. What makes Agrippa unique is his humility. He refused triumphs, deflected praise, always pushed Augustus into the spotlight. In 23 BC, when Augustus was seriously ill and might die, everyone expected Agrippa to seize power. He had the legions. He had the popularity. He could have done it. He didn't. He stepped back and supported Augustus's recovery. That's remarkable. How many generals in history had the power to become emperor and chose not to? Agrippa teaches us that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when not to be in charge. That loyalty and competence can be more valuable than ambition. That the guy who does the work isn't always the guy who gets the credit, and sometimes that's okay. Without Agrippa, there's no Roman Empire. Augustus gets the statues and the month named after him. But Agrippa won the wars and built the infrastructure that made it all possible. So what do these four generals teach us? Scipio showed us that innovation and adaptation beat tradition. That studying your enemy is more important than following the playbook. Marius demonstrated that systems matter. That reorganizing how you do things can be as revolutionary as any battle victory. Caesar proved that speed, audacity, and personal leadership can overcome incredible odds. That controlling your narrative is as important as winning the fight. And Agrippa taught us that loyalty, competence, and humility can be more powerful than raw ambition. These men built Rome's empire. But they also planted the seeds of its destruction. Marius's reforms made soldiers loyal to generals instead of Rome. Caesar's ambition broke the Republic. The civil wars devastated Italy. The concentration of power in one man's hands, even someone as capable as Augustus, created a system that would eventually collapse under incompetent emperors. Military genius doesn't solve political problems. It often creates them. Why study ancient generals in 2024? Because human nature hasn't changed. The tactics are different, we have drones instead of elephants, but the principles remain. Leadership, strategy, logistics, morale. These concepts are timeless. Every modern military academy studies these campaigns. Business schools analyze their strategies. Leaders in every field can learn from how these men motivated, organized, and achieved the impossible. Rome's greatest generals were brilliant, ruthless, innovative, and deeply flawed. They built an empire that lasted 1,000 years. They developed military doctrines still used today. They changed the course of Western civilization. They were also conquerors who left trails of destruction across continents. Heroes and villains depending on which side of the sword you were on. That's the complexity of history. That's what makes it worth studying. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Roman military history, do me a favor, hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share this with other history enthusiasts. Subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more ancient history content coming. Drop a comment below. Which Roman general would you want commanding your army? Scipio's brilliance? Marius's organization? Caesar's audacity? Or Agrippa's loyalty? I'm curious what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.